following the Gospel of John this Lenten season. Our scripture passage today comes from chapter 2, beginning with verse 13. Listen for the word of the Lord. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. Making a whip of cords, he drove all of them out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. He told those who were selling the doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then said to him, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" Jesus answered, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "This temple's been under construction for 46 years. You will raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. After he was raised from the dead, the disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. When we're baptized, we've got a series of questions that we ask people, one of which is, do you renounce all evil? What that means is, will you live an ethical life? Ethics matter, morals matter. I want to use some moral concepts that have been popularized by Jeffrey Stout and Alistair McIntyre to try to unpack what this story is about today. So let's start like this. Think of some game that you like, some game that has some complexity to it, whether it's chess or football, something like that, something that's somewhat complex. And think that each game creates its own little sense of reality, its own world. And you learn to play the game within that world, within its rules, within its practices, and you keep on playing the game to develop a sense of excellence. You have to practice. When you practice, you become better, and you grow the more you practice, and as your skills are honed, you play to win, yes, but more than that, you learn to love the game. You learn to love the game in the world that creates. What was it? The sports people say it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. When you play these complex games within these little worlds, there may be other areas of your life outside of this world that are improved because you have learned what it is to have this sense of excellence. So think about these games that we play. There's things inside of the game that are good, and when you practice those moves, those exercises, those strategies, those are internal to the game itself. But as you practice them, you're also practicing some virtues, aren't you? Christian ethics calls it the 4 cardinal virtues. When you practice the game right, you're gaining a sense of wisdom. You learn how to play the game and the strategies. You anticipate what may be coming. You strengthen your mind. You strengthen yourself to see the possibilities of what's coming down the road. You gain practical wisdom. Secondly, gain a sense of courage because you try new moves. You push yourself. You take chances. You take courageous moves in chess, you take courageous moves on the football field. You make sacrifices in the short term in order to win in the long term. You risk danger or embarrassment, but you gain a sense of courage, a strength of character. Thirdly, you learn about playing fair. You play by the rules. You learn what the rules are for that particular game, and you follow the rules. You don't cheat. You give everyone their due respect. You gain a sense of integrity. The fourth thing is restraint. You learn to restrain yourself. In physical sports, you make sure that you play hard as you can, but you do not try to physically harm an opponent. You just don't do it. You restrain yourself. And when you're playing chess, you restrain yourself. You may want to stay up 3 days and nights in a row playing the game to strengthen yourself, but don't do it. You have to take care of yourself. You learn restraint in these games. You learn restraint towards other people, and so you come to see something of the common good that you're practicing. There's goods inside of the game that are practices that help us gain this sense of excellence. But there's also goods that are outside the game. Things that you play outside the game so that you can that you practice outside the game that can be helpful also. Money's a good thing. Money can set you free to play better. If it sets you free to exercise more and do more repetitions, then the money is good for the game. But if money is the only thing you focus on, or you're focusing more on what you're doing with your stocks and bonds and your properties that you've gotten from all the money that you've raised, then all of a sudden you're focusing there and you've forgotten your focus on the inside of the game. So money can become a corruption to the game. Medical drugs can be for physical health, and therefore they're good. They're outside of the game, they're outside of that little world, but they can be very good for keeping people healthy. But then there's other drugs that can make you stronger, bigger, that can have you win more, the anabolic steroids and growth hormones and hormone modulators and beta-2 agonists and all of these things that can end up harming athletes in the long term. And so therefore these goods are corrupting, and they harm the self and therefore harm the game because they have a corrupting influence. External influences can become corrupting. Gambling by itself is not an inherently bad thing. It can be fun. But if you're a football player betting on your own team to win or lose, that can distort your motivation, tilt the game. When these external goods are used in the wrong way, they corrupt the inside of the game. It is to practice things that are unwise, unfair. Justice is spoiled. The internal good of winning becomes corrupted. The internal good of the game itself becomes corrupted. But you think about it, it goes even further. Think about TV cameras. There's nothing inherently wrong with a TV camera, right? And you can bring TV cameras in to film a game. That's a good thing. More people get to see it and experience it. But then some player starts to play to the camera, so he's going to look good on the reruns. And then the internal goods of the game are spoiled. Or maybe the TV cameras put in some commercials, and that's okay. Nothing wrong with a good commercial. But then more and more commercials are added, and pretty soon the game gets delayed, and the rhythm of the team is thrown off, and the internal good of the game is corrupted by these external influences. You get the basic idea of things that are good internal to the game and things that are external to the game. And this is an ethical idea you can think about in other areas too. A doctor practices in a complex world, don't they? The doctor in this world that they're practicing is to care for a patient. And they practice in all the things that they do, they're practicing these 4 cardinal virtues. A lifelong learning is about a sense of wisdom that helps them care for people better. There's a sense of courage in making decisions in tough situations. There's a sense of justice in taking care of all the patients, no matter who. There's a sense of temperance in learning you don't stay up late the night before surgery because that might throw off your game in the surgery suite. And you learn from other role models, from other doctors. There's goods that are practiced in the game that make the doctor better, make medicine better. But there's also external goods. Maybe a doctor gets a piece of new equipment. That can be very good. The doctor has to pay for the equipment. That's how it goes. And you spread it out among the patients. That's fair and reasonable. But maybe there's the temptation to pay off that piece of equipment sooner. So the doctor's tempted to use the equipment unnecessarily to bill the patient or the insurance companies. Then the treatment is not helping that patient. The doctor is using that patient. The external good is a temptation that can corrupt the internal game. It's kind of fun to use this idea and think about it in different settings where we have these practices. Marriage is a case in point. A marriage between 2 people is something that creates its own little world. And when you practice being married to each other, there's a sense of excellence that comes. You gain in good practices in marriage, you gain a sense of wisdom, a depth of understanding of the awe of another human being known in depth. It is amazing. You learn a sense of courage. Because you have each other, you can trust life more and you can take more risks because you are not alone. You learn a sense of justice, to be truthful with each other and fair, and forgiving and kind. You learn a sense of balance in life, that in order to take care of the marriage, there's other things outside that you need to not do. You may have the external good of a job, but you can't be at your job all the time because it would corrupt the internal good of the marriage. You can have friends, and friends are wonderful, unless friends overstep their boundaries and throw off the balance of a married couple, which is what an affair is. It distorts the wisdom, it deletes the trust, it makes people fearful, it's practicing untruth and injustice, and it throws off the balance of life. You get the idea. In all these different social practices that we have, there's things that are internal to the game, that are part about growing in a sense of excellence in this world that we're creating, in that area that we're living in. And the greatest danger is these external things that can come in and corrupt the internal game that needs to be played. And so that's what I want us to have us think about as we think about this story of Jesus this morning. Why did Jesus get so angry that he makes some ropes into a whip and he starts driving people out of the place and turning over the tables? Why did Jesus get so angry? These business people were just selling some religious products in the church. What's wrong with that, right? Well, think about that in terms of external and internal goods. What is the internal good of coming to worship? When you gather together in worship, the greatest good is coming to experience the presence of God, coming to somehow sense the mystery, the awe, the transcendence, the holiness. Holiness is the radiant excellence of God. And that's something that needs to be focused on, and that's something that needs to not be distracted into other things. And also in worship, you're doing it with other people. You're doing it with other people so that the community together feels and experiences that radiant excellence of the holiness of God, the transcendence, the love. Now think about the church in terms of external things that can corrupt it. There are external goods that can throw off the meaning of worship. You'll think of places that sell little trinkets outside of worship, little gold embossed Bibles, and what can that do but maybe cheapen the sense of transcendence? All these little gadgets and whatnots that people sell, can it cheapen the sense of transcendence? Or maybe there's a group that takes a trip to the Holy Land, and wouldn't it be great to take a trip to the Holy Land, and that can be a good thing, but what if that little group carries on and then they come to only talk among themselves and they're not talking with other people in the church, and then the good becomes a corrupting influence? Or what if the church kitchen becomes a place where people go instead of worship? Maybe someone doesn't want to listen to the minister they don't like, or they don't want to sit with people they don't know. Then the external good of a church kitchen can corrupt the internal good of what we're really together, which is to worship together, to experience together the holiness of God, to grow in the spiritual practices in which we come to discover a sense of wisdom and a sense of justice and a sense of transcendence that come from gathering together and seeking God's presence. John Calvin said long ago that worship is like a theater, like a play in a theater, except when it comes to worship, God is the audience, and the people in the pews are the actors. What we do in worship is have the actors practice. We practice our roles for living our everyday lives. We learn the story through sermon and songs. We learn what it is to experience God's presence. We see the trajectory of where God is headed in growing and learning about this divine story, so that as we move into the world, we can improvise and be God's actors in the world on a trajectory that is truthfully playing with integrity the biblical story here and now. We go out into the world, into our everyday lives, knowing that this big world is God's story, and we live in God's story now because we've practiced that in worship. What place does the minister have in worship? Well, the minister is like a director in the theater, trying to help people learn their lines, to understand the story, what this divine drama is about, trying to inspire people and to help them be creative in their understanding and see more profoundly what's being said. Jesus drives people out of the sanctuary because these external goods have corrupted the story, God's story. They've spoiled the central narrative. The minister's role is to help people be ready when the curtain rises, to be ready for our time on the stage of life, our time to act. Will we, when it's our time to act in the world, be the hero, or will we be the coward? It has to do with what happens in worship, because in worship we practice living in the presence of God intentionally, in focused ways. The wisdom that is gained in worship of connecting with the holiness of God and seeing ourselves as part of God's good creation and living into that story. In worship, we practice the courage of the cross, the courage of what it means to live lives of sacrificial love. In worship, we practice the justice of the prophets, talking about issues, important issues where people are harmed or helped, and learning how we can be a people together in a world of peace and justice. In worship, we practice restraint. In worship, we practice the norms of what it means to learn to live together with people of difference, to learn to live together with people of difference so we can embody that world and practice here what will need to happen on the outside. Because if we don't get it here, we can't get it anyplace else. We have to practice the norms of behavior in which we learn to love one another. Worship is the practice of seeking God, of living together as God's people, practicing the virtues that make life excellent. Learning to live in the divine drama of God's good creation, playing our part as moral actors in the reign of God, giving it our all, heart, mind, will, our whole selves, experiencing and sharing the wonder, the beauty, the goodness, the radiant excellence, the love of God, and making sure that nothing gets in the way of our coming to understand ourselves and our brothers and sisters in the church as all part of that same story. That is Jesus' story to us in the cleansing of the temple and in this season of Lent, calling us to make sure that we have cleansed the external influences that would corrupt us, and finding again the wonder of being in the presence of God together. Amen.
Thanks for watching our video. Make sure to subscribe to get the latest and greatest videos from the Old Stone Church. And if you feel blessed by our message, please go to theoldstonechurch.org and click to donate. God bless you today and forever. The Old Stone Church. We've been loving Christ and serving City since 1820.